In recent years, Europe has found itself at the center of one of the deepest energy and economic transformations since World War II. The war between Russia and Ukraine, which began in February 2022, acted as a trigger for the crisis, but its roots go much deeper, into decades of systemic European dependence on Russian hydrocarbons, particularly natural gas. This dependence led to the European Union facing record energy prices, a sharp rise in inflation, and the threat of a large-scale industrial downturn as early as spring 2022. According to the European Commission, in 2022, the EU's total energy trade deficit exceeded €400 billion, a historic high. Gas, oil, and coal became key import items that suddenly turned into instruments of geopolitical pressure. Russia, which in 2021 supplied almost 40% of Europe's gas, sharply reduced exports in response to Western sanctions. This decision shocked global markets. Gas prices in Europe rose 5 to 10 times above pre-crisis levels, and energy dependence acquired a political dimension. Financial Times noted that by the summer of 2022, Europe's energy map resembled a strategic chessboard, where each country was trying to find its own path to survival. Germany, which had long built its industrial strength on cheap Russian gas, was the most vulnerable. Its chemical giants, such as BASF, began halting production, while metallurgical enterprises faced losses from rapidly rising costs. At the same time, the Italian press wrote of gas blackmail, emphasizing that Rome was forced to sign urgent agreements with Algeria and Azerbaijan to prevent a collapse of its energy system. Brussels understood that the situation required a systemic response, and it was during this period that the REPowerEU plan was developed and presented, an ambitious strategy aimed at reducing dependence on Russian fossil fuels and accelerating the transition to renewable energy sources. According to European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, Europe had to accomplish in just over 5 years what had been planned to stretch over a decade. The key elements of the plan focused on 3 directions: diversification of suppliers, increased energy efficiency, and accelerated adoption of clean energy. According to Bloomberg, more than €300 billion were allocated within the framework of REPowerEU for these purposes alone, including funds for infrastructure projects, modernization of power grids, and development of hydrogen initiatives. However, insiders at the European Energy Agency emphasized that quick results should not be expected. Even with large-scale investments, building LNG terminals, laying new pipelines, and deploying wind farms takes time. Meanwhile, the crisis was immediate. In 2022, energy imports became the main cause of the EU's record trade deficit, and inflation in some countries exceeded double-digit levels. One of the most important steps was the creation of a joint gas procurement platform. Essentially, Brussels decided for the first time in the history of integration to centrally coordinate energy policy. The logic was simple. EU countries should not compete with each other for limited resources, driving up prices, but rather act as a single buyer. This initiative allowed for more favorable contracts with Qatar, Norway, and the United States. According to the Wall Street Journal, in 2023, American LNG deliveries to Europe nearly doubled, making the United States the largest gas exporter to the EU. But this shift also had its consequences. Gas prices in Europe, although lower than at the peak of 2022, remained above pre-crisis levels, directly affecting the competitiveness of European industry. Business Insider noted that while the United States benefited from cheap domestic energy, Europe was gradually losing ground as a center of industrial production. The situation was further complicated by high market volatility. Any news of supply disruptions from Norway or problems with LNG infrastructure triggered price spikes. For ordinary citizens, this translated into higher electricity and heating bills, becoming a political factor. In Italy and Germany, mass protests were held against rising costs and energy poverty. Reuters reported that more than 35 million Europeans were in a state of energy poverty, with a significant portion of income going toward utility payments. Meanwhile, climate goals remained intact. The EU committed to reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 55% by 2030 and achieving climate neutrality by mid-century. This created a unique triple challenge: ensure reliable supply, mitigate economic impacts, and maintain the path toward decarbonization. According to the International Energy Agency, in 2023, the share of renewable energy in the EU energy mix reached a record 40%. Wind and solar power supplied more than a fifth of total electricity production. However, experts warned that rapid growth in green energy did not solve the stability problem, as weather dependency made the system vulnerable. That is why, alongside renewables, investments in nuclear energy were being discussed, particularly in France and Central European countries. Energy conservation policies also played a key role in the new architecture. The European Commission introduced mandatory measures to reduce electricity consumption during peak hours. Insiders told the Financial Times that confidential documents considered scenarios for shutting down industrial plants in the event of severe shortages, although this was never officially announced. Paradoxically, the energy crisis simultaneously became a catalyst for accelerating reforms. As Politico noted, European energy, long accustomed to a comfortable dependence on cheap Russian gas, suddenly had to adapt to a new reality. The adaptation is painful, but necessary. Today, according to the European Commission, energy prices have indeed fallen compared to peak levels, but this decline does not signify a victory. Europe remains vulnerable to global shocks, from LNG supply disruptions to fluctuations in global oil prices. Moreover, intense competition for resources with Asia adds further instability. The Economist recently wrote that Europe has entered an era of expensive energy. This is not a temporary phenomenon, but a structural shift that will shape the region's economy for decades to come. Balancing energy security, affordable prices, and climate goals is now Brussels' primary challenge. In this context, Goldman Sachs analysts warn that EU energy policy has become a key factor in competitiveness. If Europe cannot secure reliable and low-cost energy sources, part of its industry will be forced to relocate to the United States, China, or other regions with lower costs. That is why the energy discussion in Europe today goes far beyond economics or climate. It is a matter of geopolitics, survival, and strategic future. Europe finds itself in a situation where the old model has been dismantled and a new one has yet to be built. How successfully it navigates this challenge will determine not only its place in the global economy, but also the very idea of European integration. That is why many experts agree that the coming decade will be decisive for European energy. Mistakes or delayed decisions could lead to a loss of industrial capacity and increased social tension. At the same time, a successful implementation of the green transition will give the EU the opportunity to emerge from the crisis as a global leader in sustainable development. The question is whether Europe will have the political will and financial resources to navigate this challenging period. As Deutsche Welle notes, the energy crisis has become a moment of truth for the European Union, and its consequences will be felt for many years. One thing is already clear: Europe's future is inseparable from its ability to build a new, more independent and resilient energy system.